be y'all's definition of the best definition for when a nation reaches its credit limit?
That sounds like an answer for an economics professor.
I'm a professor of public affairs and government. I mean, the answer to that is when the rest of the world doesn't wish to hold your debt, which is not a problem that the United States faces right now. On the contrary, the problem that we have is the rest of the world is demanding more of our debt, and the dollar is rising.
Okay.
Europe has that problem. The UK has that problem. The euro is now below the dollar and with no bottom in sight at the moment. And the US doesn't have that problem right now. It's a mixed blessing for us that we don't, because it also means that we export our inflation to Europe, which is a cheap way of dealing with some of it. That's what the Fed is doing by raising interest rates, and to the rest of the world, by the way, to Latin America, to so my view is that I agree with you that inflation is a serious problem, but the underlying sources of it are in the energy supply, in the supply chain, some degree in the housing sector. And these need to be dealt with by a serious, let's call it a whole of government effort, to the extent they can be dealt with. To some degree, the energy problem may be a long-term problem. I don't know what the geology is like or what the production is going to be like. And I don't know anybody who is completely confident maybe in the industry. So this is something we may be facing for quite some time. But it's not going to be solved by higher interest rates, except by crushing labor, crushing wages, crushing employment, and generally speaking, transferring income from middle class and working class Americans back to the banking sector, which is just going to aggravate every kind of social division that we presently are experiencing. So it's not the right solution. It's a cop-out on the part of public policy to hand inflation over to the central bank and say, gee, that's not our problem, you deal with it, we'll just worry about the easy stuff.
I do want to take this opportunity to say the one way that is not a definition is a statutory debt limit, which is an insane thing, and we should get rid of it. And I say that as a deficit hawk because it doesn't do anything to manage fiscal policy. It just means that Congress is prohibited from paying for the debt that it has owed, which effectively turns Uncle Sam into a deadbeat. And so we have these crises every now and then when the debt limit comes up, and it is not an effective way of managing our debt, but it can be dangerous by forcing a default. So I think that one thing I would hope for the future is we come up with some better way of dealing with that. I wanted to ask Jamie, because one of your comments got me even more depressed when I was thinking about it, and so I want to ask you about that, because you were talking about the future of the dollar. And one of the reasons that you can say, well, the United States is in a better position than, say, Great Britain or somebody else, not to have to worry about their debt so much, is because of the dominance of the dollar as the world currency. But you mentioned that it could be that in some time in the future, the dollar would not be the dominant currency. Would that have, is that something we should worry about in terms of the amount of debt and the long-term debt that we're piling on? Is that some reason to try to bring that into a more sustainable future?
It's an extremely rough, delicate question. Rough and delicate at the same time. My sense of this, and I published something on this last spring, which I'm republishing shortly, is that what we're seeing is the creation of a zone which will not be using the dollar or the euro. And that zone is centered around the Russian Federation, around China, to a degree their trade with India, with Iran, and they're working on settling energy trade, for example, in national currencies. They can do that, but that's not quite the same thing as creating a reserve asset that competes with the dollar. Because you don't need a reserve asset if the trade is balanced, the accounts liquidate over a short period of time. If you have unbalanced trade, then you need a financial reserve. And at the moment, there's no suitable alternative. The Chinese currency, the RMB, is the large item, but there's no substantial amount of Chinese debt in the world. And the capital flows are controlled in China thanks to a sensible, pragmatic development policy. The Russian ruble is the currency of one country, and I don't think that's going to be a reserve asset broadly held anytime soon. So that's my sense is that for the moment. Okay, now I'll come back since we're close to the end. I always like to close by quoting the possibly apocryphal remark at the end of his life of the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who reported to have said that Almighty Providence takes special care of drunks, fools, and the United States of America.